Humanity had been part of the Galactic Council for only 12 years, and in a galaxy where other species measured their histories in thousands of years, humans were nothing but newcomers. The great alien civilizations looked at Earth the way a grown man might look at a crawling baby, and they saw no reason to show respect to such a young race. Ambassador Elena Vasquez served as the voice of Earth among the stars, and she worked hard every single day to earn a place for humanity at the table of galactic power. She was a strong woman with dark hair and kind eyes, and she believed that patience and diplomacy would eventually win the respect that Earth deserved. Her 8-year-old daughter Sophia traveled with her aboard Citadel Prime, the massive space station where the Galactic Council held its meetings and made its laws. Sophia was a bright child with her mother's eyes and her father's curious spirit. She loved to explore the endless corridors of Citadel Prime, and she dreamed of becoming a xenobiologist when she grew up so she could study all the amazing alien creatures in the galaxy. The human delegation adored her, and even some of the friendlier alien species found her innocent wonder to be charming. The Galactic Council was made up of 12 elder species, but the most powerful among them was the Valkyrie Dominion. The Valkyrie were tall insectoid creatures with hard shells and cold compound eyes, and they had ruled over large portions of the galaxy for more than 10,000 years. They viewed younger races as resources to be used and controlled, and they especially disliked humanity because humans had strange ideas about individual rights and freedom. The Valkyrie high priests held enormous power in their society, and their religious laws were considered sacred and unbreakable. Any violation of these laws demanded blood payment, and the Valkyrie had destroyed entire civilizations over matters of religious offense. On the day that changed everything, Ambassador Vasquez was attending a diplomatic reception in the grand halls of Citadel Prime. Sophia had grown bored with the endless adult conversations, and she wandered away from her caretaker to explore a corridor she had never seen before. The hallway was beautiful, decorated with strange glowing symbols and ancient carvings that seemed to dance in the dim light. Sophia did not know that she had entered a restricted area. She did not know that the chamber at the end of the hallway was a sacred Valkyrie holy site. She was just a curious child following pretty lights, and when she stepped through the ancient doorway, she triggered an alarm that echoed throughout the entire station. Valkyrie guards seized her within seconds, and their rough claws left bruises on her small arms. She cried out for her mother as they dragged her before the high priests, and her tears meant nothing to the cold alien judges who stared down at her. Ambassador Vasquez rushed to the council chambers as soon as she heard the news, and her heart nearly stopped when she saw her daughter held in chains before the assembled alien leaders. She fell to her knees and begged for mercy, explaining that Sophia was just a child who had made an innocent mistake. The Valkyrie high priest rose from his throne and pointed one sharp claw at the trembling girl. He declared that the human child had violated sacred law and that blood payment was required to cleanse the offense. There could be no exceptions and no mercy, for the gods of Valkar demanded justice. Ambassador Vasquez pleaded with every member of the council, going from species to species and begging them to show compassion. Some of the younger races looked uncomfortable, but they were too afraid of the Valkyrie to speak against them. The elder species saw something else entirely when they looked at the crying human mother, and that something was opportunity. Humanity had been growing too fast and getting too confident. The humans talked about rights and freedom as if these concepts applied to everyone, and such ideas were dangerous to the old order of the galaxy. Here was a chance to humble the upstart humans and remind them that they were nothing compared to the ancient powers. The vote was called, and Ambassador Vasquez watched in horror as 9 of the 12 species voted in favor of execution. Only 3 races voted to spare Sophia, and their voices were drowned out by the majority. The decision was final under galactic religious tolerance protocols, and no appeal was possible. They did not even give Elena time to say goodbye. Valkyrie guards held her back as the high priest approached Sophia with a ceremonial blade, and the little girl looked at her mother with eyes full of confusion and fear. She did not understand what was happening or why these aliens wanted to hurt her. Elena screamed and fought against the guards, but she was only human, and they were far too strong. She watched helplessly as the blade fell, and the light faded from her daughter's eyes. Sofia Vasquez, 8 years old, died on the cold floor of the council chambers while her mother's screams echoed off the ancient walls. The council members watched with cold indifference, and some of them even seemed satisfied. The message had been sent, and the upstart humans would now understand their place in the galactic order. News of the execution reached Earth within hours, and the entire planet fell into shocked silence. Billions of humans watched the footage that the Valkyrie had proudly broadcast across the galaxy, and they saw a child murdered while her mother begged for mercy. They saw alien faces showing no emotion, no regret, no humanity. The United Nations called an emergency session, and every leader on Earth attended. They spoke for only 3 minutes, and when they finished, Secretary-General Amara Akanko stepped before the cameras that would broadcast her words to every corner of the galaxy. Her voice was calm and steady, showing no anger and no fear. She spoke only 7 words, but those words would echo through history forever. "You have woken what should have slept." Then the transmission ended, and Earth went dark. Every communication channel, every diplomatic frequency, every trade negotiation simply stopped. The humans had nothing more to say to the galaxy, and the silence that followed was more terrifying than any threat could have been. The council members laughed at the dramatic human response, certain that the young race could do nothing against their combined power. They had thousands of warships and trillions of soldiers, and humanity had been in space for barely a century. What could the humans possibly do? They were about to find out. Deep beneath the Swiss Alps, far below the nuclear bunkers and forgotten military bases of the Cold War, there existed a place that appeared on no map and in no government record. This place was called Vault Prometheus, and it held humanity's oldest and darkest secret. General Marcus Stone was one of only 7 people on Earth who knew the truth about what slept beneath the mountains. He commanded Omega Division, a military unit so classified that even most world leaders did not know it existed. His job was simple but terrifying, and that job was to guard the vault and pray that it would never need to be opened. When the news of Sophia's execution reached Earth, General Stone received a single coded message from the Secretary General. The message contained only 2 words, but those words changed everything. "Wake him." Stone took a military helicopter to a hidden entrance in the mountains, and then he descended alone into the depths of the Earth. The elevator carried him down for nearly 15 minutes, passing through layers of rock and metal and ancient stone. When the doors finally opened, he stepped into a corridor that should not have existed. The walls were covered in warnings written in languages that had died before recorded history began. Stone had spent years studying these ancient texts, and he knew what they said. They warned future generations never to open the vault unless the stars themselves threatened the survival of mankind. They spoke of a weapon created in desperation, a warrior designed to fight enemies from beyond the sky. Stone walked past these warnings with a data chip clutched in his hand. On that chip was the footage of Sophia's death, and he would use it to wake the sleeper. The corridor opened into a vast chamber lit by technology that modern science could not explain. Strange machines hummed with power that had not faded in 12,000 years. And at the center of it all stood a single stasis pod made of metal and crystal. Inside that pod lay a man, or at least something that had once been a man. He appeared young, perhaps 30 years old, with a powerful build and features that seemed carved from stone. He had slept in this chamber since before the pyramids were built, since before the first cities rose from the mud. since before humanity had learned to write. The ancient texts called him the first soldier. He had been created by a human civilization that rose and fell before the last ice age, a civilization that had achieved technology far beyond anything the modern world possessed. They had built him to fight a war against something terrible that came from the stars, and he had won that war at a cost that nearly destroyed his creators. When the threat was ended, the survivors sealed him away because they feared what he might become if left awake. He was too powerful, too dangerous, too perfect at the one thing he had been made to do. So they put him to sleep and left warnings for their descendants, hoping that he would never need to wake again. General Stone approached the control panel and entered the activation sequence that had been passed down through countless generations. The machines around him began to glow brighter, and the stasis pods started to hum with energy. Frost cracked and fell away from the crystal surface, and the man inside opened his eyes. Those eyes were deep and ancient, holding memories of battles fought before human civilization began. He drew his first breath in 12,000 years, and the air filled his lungs like fire. The pod opened with a hiss of escaping gases, and the man stepped out on legs that should have been weak but moved with terrible grace. He was naked and unarmed, but General Stone felt more afraid than he had ever felt in his life. The ancient warrior looked at Stone with eyes that seemed to see through flesh and bone to the very soul beneath. His voice was rough from millennia of silence, but his words were clear. "Why have you woken me? What threatens our kind?" Stone held out the data chip with trembling hands and explained how to use the display screen. The ancient warrior, whose name according to the oldest texts was Kale, took the chip and activated the footage. He watched in silence as the recording played. He saw a little girl dragged before alien judges, her small body shaking with fear. He saw her mother begging on her knees for mercy that would never come. He saw the blade fall and the child die, and he saw the cold faces of the aliens who watched without a trace of emotion. When the footage ended, Kale stood perfectly still for a long moment. His face showed no expression, but something changed in his eyes, and that something was more frightening than any display of rage could have been. "How many of them are there?" he asked in a voice like grinding stone. General Stone answered quickly, his words tumbling over each other in his hurry to explain. "There were 12 species on the Galactic Council, with populations numbering in the trillions. They commanded thousands of warships and had technology that humanity could barely understand. They had ruled the galaxy for thousands of years and had never been challenged by any force." Kale listened to all of this without changing his expression. When Stone finished speaking, the ancient warrior nodded slowly and spoke 2 words that would echo through history. "Not enough." He walked past Stone toward the deeper chambers of the vault, where ancient weapons and armor waited for their master to reclaim them. His body, preserved perfectly by technology beyond modern understanding, hummed with power as long-dormant systems activated. Biotechnology woven into his flesh and bones came online, making him stronger and faster and more deadly than any natural being could ever be. Stone followed at a safe distance, watching as Kale armed himself with weapons that looked both ancient and impossibly advanced. The warrior moved with purpose and absolute certainty, as if he had been preparing for this moment across all the long millennia of his sleep. "What are you going to do?" Stone finally asked. Kale turned to look at him, and for just a moment, something almost like sadness flickered in those ancient eyes. He had been made for war, created to be humanity's wrath against those who would harm the innocent. He had hoped never to wake again, but the galaxy had made its choice. "I'm going to remind them," Kale said softly, "why our ancestors sealed me away." He walked toward the surface, toward a world that had changed beyond recognition, and a galaxy that had forgotten the terrible things humanity could do. Behind him, the vault began to power down, its purpose finally fulfilled after 12,000 years of patient waiting. The first soldier had risen, and the galaxy would learn to fear the small blue world that had dared to create him. The Galactic Council expected retaliation from the humans, and they prepared for it with confidence and even excitement. They stationed additional warships around Citadel Prime and increased security throughout the station. They monitored every human vessel in the galaxy and tracked every communication from Earth. They were ready for missiles and bombs. They were ready for terrorist attacks and assassination attempts. They were ready for the clumsy, desperate violence of a young species striking out in grief and rage. They were not ready for Kale. He arrived on Citadel Prime in a small shuttle that somehow avoided every scanner and patrol ship in the system. The vessel landed in a restricted docking bay without permission, and by the time security forces responded, it was empty. The only sign of the intruder was an open hatch and footprints leading into the station. The first guards to encounter Kale never saw him coming. One moment they were patrolling the corridor, and the next moment they were lying on the floor, paralyzed but fully conscious. He had struck their nerve centers with such precision that they could not move or speak, but they could see and hear everything around them. They watched helplessly as the human walked past them without a second glance. More guards came, and more guards fell. Kale moved through the most secure facility in the galaxy like a ghost, never running, never hiding, simply walking forward with terrible patience. He did not kill anyone, but the bodies he left behind told their own story. Every soldier, every security officer, every warrior who tried to stop him ended up frozen on the ground, their weapons unfired and their communications cut. The station's commanders grew desperate as reports flooded in from every sector. They sent their best units, their elite fighters, their champions who had never known defeat. Each one fell to the silent human who walked among them like death itself. Kale reached the council chambers during a session, where the 12 species were discussing how to respond to Earth's silence. The great doors opened without warning, and the assembled aliens turned to see a single human standing in the entrance. He wore simple human clothing with no armor and carried no visible weapons. He was alone against the most powerful gathering in the galaxy, surrounded by guards and soldiers and creatures who could crush him with their bare hands. And yet he walked forward with the calm confidence of a predator among prey. "How dare you enter this chamber?" screamed High Counselor Velkoth of the Valkyrie, his compound eyes blazing with fury. "Guards, seize this creature." 12 Valkyrie elite guards rushed toward Kale from all directions. They were the finest warriors their species had ever produced, trained from birth to kill without mercy or hesitation. Kale did not even slow his pace. He moved through them like water through stones, his hands striking with impossible speed and precision. In less than 3 seconds, all 12 guards lay paralyzed on the floor, and Kale continued walking as if nothing had happened. The council members recoiled in shock and fear. Weapons were drawn by the remaining guards, but no one dared to fire. They had just watched their best warriors fall like children, and they understood that this human was something beyond their experience. Kale stopped in the exact spot where Sofia Vasquez had died. He looked down at the floor for a moment, and then he raised his eyes to meet the gaze of every council member in turn. "I am here to offer you a choice," he said, his voice calm and almost gentle. "Surrender the 9 who voted for the child's death. Let them face human justice. In return, there will be no war." High Counselor Velkoth recovered his courage and rose from his throne with a laugh that clicked and chittered through the chamber. He spread his arms wide to encompass the grandeur of the council and the power it represented. "One human threatens the Galactic Council?" he mocked. "Your species has existed for a cosmic eye blink. We have conquered 1,000 worlds and ruled this galaxy for ages beyond your comprehension. You are insects pretending to be predators, and you dare to come here and make demands?" Kale smiled, but the expression held no warmth and no humor. It was the smile of something ancient and terrible, something that had seen civilizations rise and fall like waves upon a shore. "Your ancestors knew my kind," he said softly, and his words cut through the chamber like knives. 12,000 years ago, the Valkyrie sent a colony fleet to a small blue world they thought would be easy to conquer. Thousands of ships carrying millions of your people, all heading toward Earth. The chamber fell silent as Kale spoke. Some of the older council members exchanged nervous glances, recognizing references to legends they had dismissed as myth. "Those ships never returned," Kale continued. "No message, no distress signal, no survivors. Your historians call it the Great Silence. They say the fleet simply vanished. But I know what happened to them, because I was there." He took a step forward, and every guard in the chamber took a step back. "I was there when they entered our solar system. I was there when they fired on our cities and killed our children. And I was there when we destroyed every single one of them, so completely that not even debris remained." High Counselor Velkith's confidence cracked, and fear began to show in his alien eyes. The ancient texts did speak of a lost fleet, and no one had ever explained what had happened to it. "You have one cycle to decide," Kale said. "Surrender the 9, or face the consequences. I came here alone as a gesture of good faith. The next time I come, I will not be alone, and I will not be offering peace." He turned and walked toward the door, passing through the paralyzed guards without looking at them. No one moved to stop him. No one even breathed until he had left the chamber. When the doors closed behind him, chaos erupted. Council members shouted at each other in a dozen languages, some demanding immediate military action and others urging caution. But beneath all the noise was a cold current of fear that had not existed before. Who was this human? What had humanity hidden from the galaxy? And what terrible power had they just awakened? The council had one cycle to decide, and the clock was already ticking. The Galactic Council debated for hours after Kale left, but in the end, pride won over wisdom. High Counselor Velkith convinced the other species that surrendering to human demands would show weakness that could never be recovered. If they gave in to one young species, every other race in the galaxy would lose respect for the Council's authority. Instead of surrender, they chose war. The Council mobilized the combined galactic fleet, calling ships from 8 different species to gather at a staging point near the edge of human space. 4,000 warships answered the call, the largest armada assembled in more than 300 years. Each ship was crewed by experienced warriors and armed with weapons that could crack planets. High Counselor Velkith addressed the fleet commanders before they departed, promising them glory and honor in the complete destruction of the human menace. This would not be a war, he assured them. It would be an extermination. They would glass Earth, hunt down every human colony, and erase humanity from the galaxy as a lesson to all who might challenge the elder races. The fleet jumped to hyperspace with absolute confidence in their victory. What could the humans possibly do against such overwhelming force? The answer came 14 minutes after they arrived in Earth's solar system. The combined fleet emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation, their sensors immediately scanning for human defenses. What they found seemed laughable. Earth had only 200 warships, a handful of orbital stations, and planetary shields that Valkyrie weapons could breach in a matter of hours. Admiral Corvith of the Valkyrie flagship ordered the fleet to advance. They would overwhelm the human defenders with sheer numbers and then begin the bombardment of Earth. Some of his officers wondered why the humans were not fleeing or begging for mercy, but the Admiral dismissed their concerns. What could they be waiting for? At exactly 0600 Galactic Standard Time, the first Valkyrie ships crossed into the inner solar system, and the Battle of Earth began. At 0614, it was over. Kale had not spent his one cycle waiting for the Council's answer. He had known they would choose war, because pride and arrogance always led to the same decisions. Instead, he had used the time to teach humanity's military leaders secrets that have been lost for 12,000 years. He showed them how to reactivate the defense grid buried deep within Earth's moon, weapons platforms that had slept since the last war against the stars. He gave them frequencies that could disrupt Valkyrie neural networks, turning their coordination into chaos. He revealed the locations of ancient weapon satellites hidden in the asteroid belt, systems so advanced that modern science looked primitive by comparison. But most importantly, he taught them how to fight. The humans did not meet the enemy in a traditional battle line. Instead, they scattered into small groups and used the terrain of the solar system to their advantage. They hid behind moons and asteroids, appearing suddenly to strike and then vanishing before the enemy could respond. They used decoys and false signals to confuse the alien sensors, making the fleet chase shadows while real attacks came from unexpected angles. Kale led the counterattack personally, piloting a ship that responded to his thoughts as if it were an extension of his body. He cut through the enemy formation like a blade through water, disabling ship after ship with surgical precision. His weapons targeted engines and weapon systems, not life support. He wanted survivors. He wanted witnesses. The human vessels had been upgraded with fragments of ancient technology that Kale had helped them integrate. They were faster and more maneuverable than anything the galaxy had ever seen. Their weapons punched through shields that should have been impenetrable, and their defenses absorbed attacks that should have been fatal. The combined fleet had expected to crush a primitive enemy in minutes. Instead, they found themselves fighting something beyond their understanding. Their formations broke as captains panicked and tried to flee. Their communications dissolved into screaming chaos as Valkyrie neural networks collapsed under targeted disruption. Within 8 minutes, half the fleet was disabled. Ships drifted powerless through space, their crews alive but helpless. The other half tried to retreat, but human vessels pursued them with relentless efficiency, crippling them before they could escape. By the 14th minute, not a single enemy ship remained operational. The greatest armada in 3 centuries had been defeated by a force 1/20th its size. Kale did not stop to celebrate. He had a more personal mission to complete. His ship docked with High Counselor Velkith's flagship, and security footage from the vessel would later be broadcast across the galaxy. The recording showed a single human walking through corridors filled with fallen soldiers, never running, never stopping, methodically neutralizing every guard who tried to resist. He moved like something from a nightmare, appearing and disappearing in the shadows, his strikes so fast that the cameras could barely capture them. Valkyrie warriors fired their weapons at empty air while Kale struck them from behind. Elite soldiers formed defensive positions that he simply walked through as if they did not exist. The footage showed him reaching the command chamber, where High Counselor Velkith cowered behind his throne, surrounded by his last remaining guards. Those guards fell in seconds, and then Kale stood alone before the alien who had ordered a child's death. The child was innocent, Kale said, his voice recorded clearly by the ship's systems. Velkith begged for mercy, promising anything and everything if the human would spare his life. He offered wealth and power and territory. He offered to surrender the other 8 council members who had voted for the execution. He offered to make Kale ruler of the Valkyrie Dominion itself. Kale listened to all of it without expression. And then he made his decision. He did not kill Velkith. Death would have been a mercy, a quick end to suffering and fear. Instead, he bound the High Counselor with unbreakable restraints and carried him back to his ship. One by one, Kale collected the other 8 council members who had voted to murder Sofia Vasquez. He boarded their ships, defeated their guards, and took them prisoner while the galaxy watched. By the time he was finished, all 9 were secured aboard a human vessel heading back to Earth. They would face trial for their crimes. Human trial, with evidence and witnesses and judgment. The galaxy would see that humanity did not simply destroy its enemies. They made them answer for what they had done. And that was more terrifying than any massacre could have been. The trials of the 9 council members lasted for 6 months, and every moment was broadcast across the galaxy. Billions of aliens from hundreds of species watched as humanity demonstrated something the elder races had never truly practiced. They called it due process. The accused were not tortured or executed without hearing. Instead, they were given defenders who argued on their behalf. They were allowed to speak in their own defense and explain their actions. They were presented with evidence and given chances to challenge it. The process was slow and careful and absolutely fair, and it destroyed them more completely than any quick death could have. The evidence against the 9 was overwhelming. Recordings showed them voting to kill a child who had committed nothing more than an innocent mistake. Testimony from witnesses described their cold indifference as Sophia begged for her life. Documents revealed private communications where they discussed using the execution to humble humanity and keep the young species in its place. One by one, the defenders of the accused tried every argument they could imagine. They claimed religious freedom and cultural tradition. They argued that the child had violated sacred law and that the punishment was justified under galactic protocol. They suggested that humanity had no right to judge species who were far older and more advanced. None of it worked. Human judges listened to every argument with patience, and they explained why each one failed. Religious freedom did not include the right to murder innocent children. Cultural tradition did not excuse acts that violated basic morality. Age and power did not place any species above justice. The galaxy had never seen anything like it. For thousands of years, the strong had simply crushed the weak, and might had made right. The idea that power came with responsibility, that even rulers must answer for their crimes, was revolutionary and terrifying to those who had always been on top. When the verdicts were finally announced, all 9 defendants were found guilty. But the sentences surprised everyone who expected human vengeance. They were not executed. Instead, they were sentenced to life imprisonment in a facility on Earth, where they would live out their remaining days in comfortable confinement. They would have food and shelter and medical care. They would not be tortured or mistreated. But they would never be free again, and they would spend every remaining moment knowing that their power and position had been stripped away by the very species they had tried to humiliate. Ambassador Elena Vasquez delivered the closing statement at the end of the final trial. She stood in the same courtroom where she had watched the beings who murdered her daughter be judged, and her voice was steady despite the grief that would never fully heal. "You killed my daughter because you believed we were weak," she said, her words carrying across the galaxy. "Because our history was short and our technology was young. You thought you could murder an innocent child and face no consequences because we were nothing compared to the ancient powers." She paused and looked directly at the cameras that broadcast her image to countless worlds. "You were wrong. Humanity has faced extinction before. Ice ages and plagues and wars and weapons that could have destroyed us 1,000 times. We survived because we adapt and we endure and we protect our own." Her voice grew stronger, filled not with rage but with absolute conviction. Sofia Vasquez was 8 years old. She liked butterflies and wanted to be a xenobiologist so she could make friends with aliens. You murdered her to send a message, and here is ours. She stood taller, and every being watching knew they were witnessing history. Humanity offers peace to all who seek it. We want friendship and trade and cooperation. We believe that the galaxy can be better than it has been, and we are willing to work alongside any species that shares that dream." Her eyes hardened. "But if you harm our children, our innocent, our defenseless, if you think that our kindness is weakness and our patience is fear, then we will not send diplomats and we will not send soldiers. We will send our memory, and our memory is very, very long." When the broadcast ended, silence fell across the galaxy. Something fundamental had changed, and everyone knew it. The old Galactic Council was dissolved within weeks. The elder species who had dominated galactic politics for millennia found themselves facing challenges from races they had oppressed for generations. Without the combined fleet to enforce their will, their power crumbled like ancient stone. In its place rose the Galactic Assembly, a new organization built on principles that humanity had championed. Every species had an equal voice, regardless of age or power. Individual rights were protected by laws that applied to everyone. And the new council included a permanent seat for humanity, not because they had won a war, but because they had shown a better way. Kale stood in the shadows of the courtroom during Ambassador Vasquez's speech, watching from a distance as he had watched the entire trial. When it was over and the crowds dispersed, she found him standing alone by a window that looked out at the stars. "What will you do now?" she asked. The question made him pause. For 12,000 years, he had known only war and destruction. He had been made to be humanity's wrath, designed to kill without mercy and fight without end. His creators had never imagined he might have a purpose beyond violence. But watching the trial had shown him something new. Humanity had changed in ways his creators never anticipated. They had learned to be powerful without being cruel, to seek justice without demanding vengeance. They had shown the galaxy that strength and mercy could exist together. "I will learn what else I can be," he said finally. He did not know what that would look like or how long it would take. But for the first time in his ancient existence, he had hoped that there might be more to his life than blood and battle. In the years that followed, Kale became something unexpected. He was a teacher, sharing the knowledge of his lost civilization with humans who were eager to learn. He was a guardian, watching over Earth and its colonies with eyes that never closed. He was a symbol, a reminder to the galaxy that humanity had depths they had never imagined. And in the dark corners of space where slavers and tyrants still practiced their cruelty, a new legend spread. They said that Earth had a protector, an ancient warrior who never forgot and never forgave those who harmed the innocent. They said he could appear anywhere without warning and defeat any force sent against him. They said he was humanity's memory made flesh, patient and eternal and absolutely without mercy to those who threatened his kind. They learned to fear the small blue world that had taught itself to be kind, but had never forgotten how to be terrible. And in the halls of the Galactic Assembly, where once the elder species had ruled without challenge, a simple plaque hung on the wall near the human delegation's offices. It showed the face of a smiling girl with curious eyes, and beneath it were words that would remind the galaxy forever of the price of cruelty. Sofia Vasquez. She wanted to make friends with aliens. In her memory, we build a galaxy where that dream is possible. The universe had changed because one child wandered down the wrong corridor, and nothing would ever be the same again.